A cacophony of yells stirred the raucous crowd that surrounded the makeshift ring in the large warehouse. Men and women cheering on two fighters in the center of the large room. The pit, as they called it. The brawl was brutal. Bites, scratches, and all sort of dirty fighting was allowed while the two bloody fighters tore at one another. While the crowd watched on with wild and feral cheer, Eijirou Kirishima sat up high above the ring, watching with a bored look in his eye. It was the same every day, finding ways to keep his members entertained long enough every quarter. Mindless vandalism, threatening law enforcement, and the occasional contractual job can only go so far. Fight clubs were always the last resort, but it was the same old, same old. A yawn escaped his lips while he slouched on his stone-made throne. Or so his members would call it. It really meant nothing. It was just a seat. A block carved out for him. He leaned his head on his hand, unwilling to partake in the entertainment until he felt a weight press on his shoulder, peeking up to spot you leaning on his solid frame.
So, did you take any bets tonight?
You chirped. A groan escaped his throat, staring languidly at the scene. Not worth it. The tone caught you off guard, watching his bored expression on his face.
Oh, one of those nights, huh?
You questioned, sitting on the makeshift arm of his so-called throne.
What'll make you feel better? Random run through the city? No?
You were met with silence from Kirishima, his tired eyes still watching the bloody fight below. At this point, both fighters had tired each other out, their bodies broken beyond repair. You leaned onto his shoulder, your face close to his, while you watched along with him.
How about we both get out of here?
You suggested.
Maybe some alone time might be good for you.
Gotta stay put, he simply replied. At least until this fight is over.
Well, you could spend the next 15 minutes watching something meaningless and mind-numbing. Or you could clear your head a bit. You've done so much coordinating every gang in the city. You deserve some time to yourself. Don't you think?
You turned to Kirishima, finding that his eyes turned towards you. A lazy smirk now on his face.
What?
Why don't you try and rescue me from here? He mocked playfully. Sounds like you're not trying hard enough.
I can't rescue you if you won't let me.
You retorted with a chuckle. Oh, sweet pea. If I didn't want you to, I'd be taking you instead. Suddenly, his hand wrapped around your waist and pulled you into his lap with no effort. A gasp escaped your throat, now eyeing Kirishima above you, ensuring that you were comfortable in his arms before he pulled you into his kiss, stopping whatever response you could muster. A smile tugged at his lips, still pressed on yours, while the crowd still cheered on a dying fight. He ignored everything around him and only focused on you. His hands pressed against your frame, while you returned his kiss every once in a while before he pulled away teasingly. His chuckle purred against your lips, joining in on his cheeky laughter.
You tease?
You whispered. Thanks for the compliment. He whispered back with a growl, his teeth grazing against your cheek. The redhead had grown a reputation among the common people, to those who had lost their way in hero society and needed to find some meaning behind their purpose. After his stint with the Yakuza at a young age and his prowess in the field, the young man grew to become a rising star, only to become despondent. You witnessed this change in perspective, how Kirishima grew to notice the heartache and pain of those who were unlucky. All the people who lived in slums or involved themselves with petty crime struck a chord with the up-and-coming hero. And slowly, oddly, you started to agree. It had been years since his sudden exit from pro-hero life, never showing up to meetings, skipping out on patrols, even going so far to roam the streets on his own accord. At first, he was labeled as a vigilante, filled with reckless abandonment. And then he was wiped from records, thanks to favors from old friends. His arms began to tickle your sides while the fight ensued before the both of you, enjoying each other's company rather than the entertainment his members were giving. You relished in his embrace, laughing gleefully while he played and teased. Despite where he ended up, leader of all gangs in Musatafu, he was still a cheerful, playful, and warm person.
Excuse me, sir.
That is until he was interrupted.
What?
Responded Kirishima with a deadly undertone.
It's,
His fist smashed into the stone, cracking it into almost oblivion. It was a slight interruption into the fight, silence showering over the crowd as they turned to stare at Kirishima. His hardened arms stilled over the cracked stone, causing the messenger to quake while he watched Kirishima's hardened fingers open from his fist. The look of it was both awe-inspiring and fearful.
Well, spill it out.
You coaxed further, while you lightly kicked your legs that dangled from your comfortable seat.
Hitoshi Shinso wants an audience with you.
A groan escaped from Kirishima while he sat up from the stone throne, taking you in his normal arm and carrying you against his tall frame. Your legs dangled below you while you wrapped your arms around his neck for support, enjoying the ride while it may last as he strode past his minion and headed out towards the entrance of the warehouse, leaving the quiet pit behind.
To riot!
The roar of the crowd cheered while the fight ensued, leaving Kirishima and yourself to your devices while he made his way towards the large warehouse doors. His heavy steps echoed, but his hold on you was light. For a big guy, you were always surprised by these contradicting opposites he had, whether in his speech or his body language. Your head laid across his collarbone while you eyed the large tattoo that decorated his shoulder. A tradition the both of you started when he made his first step to becoming the head of all gangs in Musatafu. His scars as well were proof of this.
You know I can walk, right?
You teased with a grin.
I know.
He nonchalantly replied with a toothy grin of his own, pressing a kiss against your temple. He relished in your giggles, keeping his hold on you. Approaching the large front sliding doors of the warehouse, you spotted a few members of your gang surrounding the infamous recluse, Hitoshi Shinso, sharp in his purple suit and his unruly purple hair. His eyes were worn and exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days. Yet he stood with a presence that you still couldn't understand.
Shinso, what brings you here?
Asked Kirishima while he slowly dropped you to the floor.
I need to speak with you privately.
Demanded Shinso while he tugged on one of his gloves.
A little matter that, I would like your perspective on. You could have just called.
Stated Kirishima, matter-of-factly.
I do own a phone. One you change every now and then, depending on whether you destroyed it in any of your raids. Trust me with the number of times I politely asked to destroy that kind of evidence on your behalf.
Kirishima chuckled, as did you along with him. True, times did get very rowdy when the both of you had to cause a little disturbance here and there. Distractions were the game. Every quarter, while Deku had his sweep of kidnappings and Ground Zero had his cullings, Kirishima's job was to divert all attention to any gang activity to keep law enforcement at bay. It was a mutual agreement, one that was made possible with Todoroki's funding, Sero's back-end activities, and Monoma's involvement on the other side. It was all clockwork.
Sorry, Shinso.
You apologized while you smiled up at Kirishima.
I'm sure Eijirou can spare a few moments, right?
Kirishima returned your smile, signaling all of his members to return inside the warehouse, leaving only himself, you, and Shinso outside.
I said privately.
Reiterated Shinso, his voice unimpressed.
Anything you have to discuss with me, you discuss with them too.
Asserted Kirishima with his arms crossed before him, his hardened arms still present.
So what's going on?
Shinso eyed the arm, its appearance intimidating. He cleared his throat before he stood lazily in front of the both of you, his lazy eyes piercing into yours.
Were you involved in a swap of inmates during that walking explosion's culling?
A rowdy cheer interrupted the conversation while the Fight Club echoed in the distance. Kirishima stared down at Shinso, also unimpressed by the sudden interrogation. You looked between the two, observing the serious look they both posed with each other. The air felt tense, causing you to squirm a little in anticipation of Kirishima's response. You knew he hated interrogations. Many times he had been caught by law enforcement only to be let go due to lack of evidence or witnesses. He was infamous, and yet no one could touch him. Thanks to a few friends, of course.
Why do you want to know?
Spoke Kirishima, breaking the silence.
Let's say two little canaries chirped, and I connected the dots.
Answered Shinso.
I now am an unofficial guardian to someone that is precious to me.
You looked up at Kirishima, spotting a tug of his lips and a small smirk while he chuckled under his breath.
You're right. We did swap someone out for somebody else.
Affirmed Kirishima, piquing Shinso's interest.
Bakugo doesn't keep track of the people his soldiers collect. But lucky him, Sweet Pea and I recognized a couple of familiar faces. One that deserves to be in the barracks, and the other, well, I guess they're with you?
Call it serendipity.
You added with a smile.
But I think Eijirou and I make for great matchmakers.
This isn't funny.
Flatly replied Shinso, his gloved hands now in his pockets.
I wasn't laughing.
You rebutted innocently.
It's the truth.
We thought it would be great that you guys reconnected.
Added Kirishima with a grin, his arm returning to its normal state.
And I think the world is now in balance.
Mm-hmm.
You affirmed with a hum, standing proudly next to Kirishima while an exhausted Shinso stared at the both of you. He scoffed lazily before he waved his hand in the air, turning to leave.
Right. Well, at least those canaries had their stories straight.
He commented while he walked away.
Try not to make too much of a mess next time, or else I'm raising my premiums.
Can't promise that, yelled Kirishima in response, causing Shinso to pause for a moment in his step. You noticed the sudden halt in his movements before he continued on, disappearing into the night.
Ugh, man, sometimes that guy gives me the creeps.
You spoke, speaking your mind freely. But he's good at what he does. I'll give him that, commented Kirishima while he looked up at the stars, admiring the twinkle in them in the sky. The air was still while the night sky cascaded over the city, its lights drawing a haze over the horizon. The sound of traffic drowned the roar of the raucous crowd back inside the warehouse while you deeply breathed everything in. Stretching your arms above your head, you swayed in front of Kirishima, looking up at him innocently with a childish smirk. Watching Kirishima's almost soft look on his face only filled you with glee. He was still the same goofy person, just geared towards another direction.
Say, wanna climb to the roof and just lay there for a while?
You suggested, catching his attention from the sky.
We could just stargaze for a bit.
You spotted his expression shift into one of thought. Seeing what looked like doubt on his face, you hopped on your feet, heading back to the warehouse.
I could just let someone know inside where we'll be. That way someone could be assigned an adjudicator and there's someone there to keep people in line.
Or, interrupted Kirishima with a gleam in his eye, we could go somewhere a little higher than the roof, away from everyone else, and just be the two of us, alone, together.
Aren't I supposed to be rescuing you from your boredom?
Unless I whisk you away. I don't need rescuing. Kirishima's eyes darted inside, watching another new fight ensue while his members continued to cheer and roar. His smile returned while he grabbed a hold of your hand, pulling you along towards one of the motorcycles that lined up in a row, and taking one without a care. He picked you up with ease, seating you at the back while he jumped in front. The suspension of the motorcycle gave butterflies in your stomach, a feeling you loved every time Kirishima decided to take a joyride. With a twist of his wrist and a push of his foot, the throttle of the motorcycle reverberated through your body and in your ears, the rev sending a joyful grin to cross your face.
I love it when you smile,
purred Kirishima over the engine. Your giggles caught his ear while you gripped onto his torso, the motorcycle roaring to life before it sped away from the warehouse. The adrenaline and the excitement coursed through your body as the city lights rushed past you in a cascade of flying colors. The feel of the air rushing past you exhilarated your senses while you reared your fist in the air, swinging it towards a window front and shattering its glass pane. Kirishima laughed while he sped faster through the city, each block receiving a blast from your sonic fists and destroying a shop or two along the way. You laughed along with him, the revving of the motorcycles climbing to greater heights through the city. It was always fun to be around Kirishima. Reckless abandonment without a care in the world. With a screech, he halted the bike by an empty car park, abandoned for some time, and took you in his embrace, pushing you into him. He pulled you back onto his lap, your legs kicking up in the air before he pulled you into a feverish kiss, unable to contain himself any longer than the ride would allow.
We're going to tear this city up, sweet pea,
he whispered, his teeth grazing against your lips tentatively.
But not before I put you in line first.